Hello, welcome everyone. Good evening, afternoon, noon, morning, night, whatever we have. Good online. I just learned it. I think like 2 seasons ago. Seasons. Whoa, no, we're not at seasons. 2 episodes ago, I learned it's good online now. So good online, everyone.
Yeah,
Also,
from my manager.
Yes. Also, welcome back to from the dead to the living. To myself.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say, talk about yourself, please.
I mean, fever of 39.2. That's kind of not nothing, right?
Well, for men, it's a deadly situation.
Also that's 39.2 degrees Celsius. So that's not freedom units. I don't know what this translates into freedom units. But anyway, so welcome back. Probably the last show of this year, I would assume. I don't know.
Yeah, likely.
Yeah, we only have 1 week left in the year. So, hello, my friend. How are you doing?
Doing well. Busy wrapping up everything before the break. And you?
As I said, back from the dead, wrapping up stuff at work. It's shortly before Christmas.
Yeah, your favorite time of the year with a lot of family stuff.
The favorite time of the year when you can meet with your extended family in the evenings and talk about things you don't really care about. So yes,
you would be very fitting in playing Uncle Scrooge in Christmas Carol. I mean.
But isn't Uncle Scrooge the guy with lots of money?
Yeah, but he's very sad. He has a lot of money, but he's very sad.
Okay, so I'm not sad, but I also don't have lots of money. So maybe that evens out here. I don't know. Well, okay. Anyway, we are not here. Well, we are also here to talk about Christmas, but mostly we are here to talk about Matteo's favorite topic, which is PowerPoint.
No.
It's well, it's Power Apps connectors. So Matteo is going to introduce us to connect. Oh, is it custom connector? Building connectors with PowerPoint? No.
No. Power Platform. It's a
and I really tried. Yes. So it's building connectors for the Power Platform. And Matteo, want to start? The stage is yours.
Sure. So let me share my screen. And why? Which is the reason of this topic? Well, everything starts from a lot of studies and researches which are highlighting how the demand of building apps is growing exponentially. Of course, here we are not talking about apps like Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We are talking about enterprise apps. This is part of
real apps.
Yeah, real apps. Exactly. So this is what typically you might have heard about, talking about the digital transformation, which is a buzzword, but in reality, what it means is that more and more companies are trying to digitalize as much as possible processes so that they can be more agile and more effective. And this became even more true with the pandemic, because suddenly we all started to work in hybrid mode. A lot of people are working from home. So the need of having access to internal tools and internal processes, even from remote, became a priority. Which is the problem? That of course the traditional development approach, so building apps with code, is the most flexible one, because you can do basically whatever you want. You have a lot of flexibility, you have a lot of freedom, you have a lot of power, but at the same time also it doesn't scale very much. Because if you are a pro developer like me or Mark, you'll know that building an app from scratch it's not exactly a task that takes 1 or 2 days. It takes a while to set up everything. You have to, not to mention also everything around the development of apps, because it's not just writing the code, but it's also testing, it's also deploying, it's also working with the IT department to get the validation of the app, to work with the policies and so on.
I would like to add, debugging on live is a thing.
Exactly. That's very fitting indeed. So this is why one of the reasons why many companies, including Microsoft with the Power Platform, started to offer tools that empowered not just professional developers, but also the business analysts, the people who are working on the business side, to build applications. Because typically this is a process that can scale much better, because you can empower the people who are responsible for these processes to build the tools they need to work with these processes in a better way. However, the Power Platform or these low-code ecosystems have also some challenges as well, because as much as they can accelerate the development of apps, it's very likely that at some point you might hit some limitations. And one of the most common limitation is I need to bring some data inside the app which is not exposed in any way. It's in an internal database. It's somewhere where as a business analyst, I don't know how to bring this data into the app. So this is why in the last year and a half, many companies have started to pitch the concept of fusion teams, which is the idea of having a team made by different people with different backgrounds, the professional developer, the business analyst, and the IT professional, that, however, they work together to accelerate the development of these apps. And this kind of acceleration is done through having the support of the professional developer, that instead of basically being in charge of the whole development of the app, which is very time-consuming and challenging, they are in charge of building components that can accelerate and make easier the life of the citizen developer. So the citizen developer using low-code instruments is in charge of building the main app, the user experience, the UI, and so on, which is the most time-consuming task, working side by side with the professional developer to build the pieces they need to build a fully working application. What makes this approach interesting is that if we take the role of professional developers or citizen developers, you don't really need to learn something new, because you keep working with the tools you are already familiar with. So professional developers, if we talk about the Microsoft ecosystem, they keep working with GitHub, Visual Studio Code, while citizen developer keep building apps with Power Apps, or flows with Power Automate, or bots with Power Virtual Agents, and so on. In the middle, the kind of glue between these two worlds is the cloud. So the professional developer can expose APIs or services through Azure that the citizen developer can consume. You might have heard about the topic of collaborative applications, which are these type of applications that enable the collaboration of multiple people. Collaborative applications are one of the examples of this kind of fusion team approach. Because typically when you build this type of apps, you mix together a lot of concepts which are pro-dev, like using services like Azure Communication Services, Microsoft Graphs, PaaS services from Azure, with instead low-code platforms like Power Platform, Dataverse, and so on. So in the typical workflow, where you have this collaboration between the citizen developer and the professional developer, typically what happens is that, as I mentioned, the citizen developer is in charge of building the main app and the user experience, which helps to scale. But then at some point, they'll miss something. They need some help. For example, they are building an app to manage the vacation tracking in the company, so the app you use to ask for vacation. And this information about the vacation days is stored in an internal database. So the citizen developer doesn't have any idea on how to grab this information. So they go to a pro developer, and the pro developer will help them to build this component they need to build the final app. The citizen developer doesn't have can reuse their skills to build the Power App, because Power Apps is a visual environment, and the way you create the logic of the application is based on a language called PowerFX, which is very similar, if not the same, to the language you can use in Excel to add functions and logic. So if you are a business user who is already using Excel for their everyday work, you are already familiar with this kind of experience. And what makes a Power Platform a great fit for scaling are the connectors. If you are a pro developer, you'll know that when you need to integrate a lot of services in your app, there's a lot of work to do, because typically you have to go to the portal of Twitter and Azure App Registration, Google, register an app, get the token, get the secret, implement the OAuth flow in your app. So it takes a while. With Power Platform, you already have a lot of connectors where you just log in with your account, and then you can start pulling data, interacting with the features exposed by the connector, and so on. And the connector is where the pro developer can really help, because as a pro developer, I can build a custom connector that my citizen developer can use to reach data or to interact with features that they are not exposed in the Power Platform with one of the built-in connectors. The power of this approach is that as a developer, you have access to everything, because basically you are building a service, you are building an API with all the tools you need, and you can integrate all the services you want. From a low-code, from a citizen developer perspective, this is completely transparent. So the way they use your own custom connector, which exposes the vacation days, is exactly the same way they can work with the connectors for OneDrive, SharePoint, Twitter, so the built-in ones. They don't need to have any knowledge about the platform itself or what's behind. From a technical perspective, a custom connector is nothing more than a REST API with an OpenAPI definition. And this is another reason why it's a good companion for professional developer, because as a professional developer, you don't have to learn anything new to support the Power Platform, because all you need is an OpenAPI definition. If behind this API you have .NET, you have Node.js, you have Python, you have whatever framework you want, it doesn't make a difference. And the citizen developer doesn't need to know what's behind this API. Of course, me and Mark work for Microsoft. Our background is mostly on Microsoft, so let's talk about the platform I'm mostly familiar with, which is .NET. In case you adopt .NET, .NET is a great fit for this scenario, because in .NET, especially in the latest version, they added the built-in support for OpenAPI. So when you create a new project in Visual Studio, either if you use an Azure function or a web API or a minimal web API, you add a checkbox and automatically Visual Studio will install a few packages and will set up the required infrastructure to expose these APIs with OpenAPI.
Is it the Swagger stuff that is coming in there?
Yes, correct. So just to show you a quick example, so here I have a minimal API, which is configured to use OpenAPI. So as you can see, I have this Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core package, which is the one that brings OpenAPI support. And in the initialization of this API, we have these endpoints, which are used to register the Swagger implementation, which is the OpenAPI implementation for .NET. And as you can see, thanks to this API, I can just describe an API using these extensions. So I can say this is the API, and this API simply returns a list of customers. So this is nothing more than a service that using Bogus, which is a .NET library to generate fake data, creates 20 fake customers. And here I can describe that this API is called getCustomer, that you can use it to retrieve the list of customers, that the return code is 200, and so on. In an Azure function, you can do a similar thing, even if Azure function uses the attributes. So you have these attributes that you can use to describe the API. So here you can say that this API returns a JSON, which is type list of customer, the description is a list of customer, and so on. What happens is that when you deploy this API, this automatically generates this website, which is the Swagger website that you can use to actually try the API. So from here, I can see that my API has an endpoint called customer functions that I can try. So I can hit execute, and from here, I can see that this is the request and this is the response with my list of customers. But the important part for me when it comes to help the citizen developer who is working on a Power App is that you can see that here I have a link in the page. This is the OpenAPI definition. So this is a JSON that basically describes how the API works. So you can see that here I have the endpoint, it's a get, the response is a list of customer, which is an array of an entity called customer, which is defined here below. A customer is an entity with a name, a surname, and an email. Once I have this Swagger file, this OpenAPI file, what I can do is that I can go to my Power Platform environment, and from here I can import an OpenAPI file of definition. I can give it a name. I can import a definition like this one, for example. And from here, you start a wizard to set up the connector wherever most of the things are already configured in the right way thanks to the OpenAPI definition. So, for example, I don't have security because this is a test API. But most of all, if I go here in the definition, you can see that I already have all the things you have seen before. So this is the URL. The response, the request is empty because it's a get. So there are no parameters. The response is a 200, the list of customer. And each customer is described by a mail, name, and surname. So the same exact OpenAPI has been translated into a component here. Thanks to this component, what happens is that as a citizen developer, I can go to my Power Platform environment, like this one. I can choose Add Data, and Add Data is the way you add connectors to your application. And among all the connectors which are built in the platform, SQL Server, SharePoint, Office users, you can see that I have also my custom connector, the one I have created. So I can import it. Let me give me a name, a more meaningful name. And now, as a citizen developer, I can use this connector without knowing that behind this API, there's an Azure function, it's built with .NET, there's JSON. I can just use the various endpoints. So to show you something, let me add a gallery, which is the Power Platform control to display a list of data. And I set as items, customers, which is my connector, dot customers. That is the endpoint that you have seen before. You can see here that I already have something happening here, but you don't see anything because I have to change the fields which are I'm binding. And as you can see, this is finding the data that the Azure function is returning, because as values I can pick up for the binding, I see surname, name, and email. So for example, let me pick name here and email as subtitle. So as you can see, what's happening is that I've been able to pull data from my Azure function and put it into my app. If I put the hat of a citizen developer, I have no idea what's behind this data. I have no idea that there's an Azure function. I have no idea that there's a JSON payload. I have no idea about OpenAPI. I can use my connector without knowing the technical details. However, as a professional developer, I've been able to accelerate the development of this app because as a professional developer, I don't have to build the whole app, but I have built only the API that the citizen developer can use to enrich the app. And the way I build this API is no different from the way I would build this API for a mobile app, a desktop app, or a web app. So the advantage here is that I don't have to learn a new way to build apps or build APIs, but I can reuse the same knowledge. Again, OpenAPI in the .NET ecosystem is embedded pretty much everywhere now. So I didn't show you before, but if I try to create a new project, for example, using the ASP.NET Core Web API template, you can see that in the wizard, one of the things that you can enable is enable OpenAPI support, which will give you all the goodies that you have seen before. The last thing to mention is that now you have seen the basic implementation, but if you want to go the extra mile, you can combine your APIs with Azure API management. I guess I'm pretty sure that Mark can tell you much more than what I can do. He knows Azure API management much better than me. But very, very quickly, Azure API management is a service that you can use to enrich your APIs. So you can add things like throttling, subscriptions, licensing. You can intercept the request and change the payload of the request live and stuff like that.
It's actually worth a session, I would say. API management. Let's put this on a list. That's probably...
I like the idea. The reason why I'm bringing this up, Azure API management here, other than because it's really a great tool to work with APIs and to enrich APIs. One of the things that you have for the Power Platform is that since a while they've added an extra tab in Azure API management called the Power Platform that basically enables you to automatically export an API as a connector. So from here, you can pick up your API. So here I have the same API I've seen before as Azure function. It's built in here. I added this as API management. Here you can see all the Power Platform environment you have access to. You have the display name. You click create, and automatically you will find out in this portal the connector already created. So instead of having to manually import and set up the connector, you will find this right away already deployed through API management.
Okay.
Final topic, where instead I will be very, very short because I wanted to make this short presentation focused on the connector because it's one of the most interesting parts. This is something that probably will require another session, but just as a FYI, to just give you the idea that this is possible, we talked about the backend, so exposing an API, but if you are a web developer, you can use your web skills also to support the front-end development. So instead of creating a connector to give APIs to a citizen developer, you can build custom controls that a citizen developer can drag and drop in their application. So if you don't have one of the built-in controls is not enough for your scenarios, you can also build your own custom controls. This is very interesting because there are a lot of interesting projects on the market that are really enriching the Power Platform. If you search on Google or Bing something like Power Platform design or diff original Power Platform design, you will find a lot of collections of control that you can help to build Power Platform, Power Apps that don't look like Power Apps. Yeah. There's even one that basically brings the Fluent ecosystem into Power Apps. So basically, you can build the Power Apps that look and feel like the Microsoft 365 apps. So you have all the Fluent design, all the flavors of Fluent design. This is all web development. So it's all based on TypeScript, CSS. There's a preview for using React. So .NET here is not really involved, if not for the publishing phase. So the whole toolchain is based on Node, but when you want to generate the package to publish on the Power Platform portal, you will have to use .NET because the build toolchain that generates the package to upload is based on .NET. But it's a little bit of a stretch talking about .NET in this context because, again, it's only for the toolchain. Everything else is plain JavaScript, TypeScript, and web stuff. So there's not really much C# there.
Okay, now on to the questions, I would say, because I have a few. If you are happy to take them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, worst case scenario, the connection might drop. So
okay. First of all, you said so everything is REST based. This is an interesting take because you're probably not always just building REST, or you're not just want to connect to REST. Can I also build connectors? Let's say I have a whatever interesting database, and Postgres comes to my mind because the official connector has been removed at some point and there's a new one now in town. So what would be the process? Could I also build like low-level connectors in the sense of a database connector, or is this just entirely REST-based?
No, I would say it's just entirely REST-based because you need an open API definition. So you can have a connector like that, but basically the connector will need to grab the data from the database and expose it through an API.
Got it.
So
okay. Yeah. But what about, for example, WebSockets? Would that work? Could I expose a WebSocket connection?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer. Out of the box, I would say probably no, because I don't know if you can describe with OpenAPI WebSockets connections.
You should be. I mean, okay, that's okay.
I never tried. That's an interesting question to explore. I'm more inclined to say probably no, but I don't have first-hand experience, so I don't want to tell you absolutely no, while maybe in reality there's a way.
Okay. My next question would be, is there a specific license required? Because obviously we as Microsoft employees we are always getting the, here, take it and try it. So we are kind of like unaware of the minor details between, I don't know, open source developers or community edition and professional and enterprise. And usually it's like, oh yeah, technically you could do this, but you would need to upgrade. So is this something that...
No, that's a very good question. And yes, the answer is yes. I don't know if you've noticed in my demo that when I was picking up the connector, there was a small diamond near. This is because custom connectors are part of the premium license for Power Platform. So yeah, you will need a premium license for Power Platform to use custom connectors.
Okay, understand. Assume you have built a great connector that was working pretty well, and you see that might be of interest for other developers. There is probably a way to get this into the official store.
Yeah, there's a submission process where you can basically, it's like a store of connectors where you can publish your own connector. And in this case, it will be graduated from custom connector to first official connector. So in the same way, today you can start a Power Platform project and add not just first-party connectors like OneDrive or SharePoint, but also Adobe, Dropbox, Google Drive, Twitter. These are all third-party connectors that, however, are built inside the platform, so you don't have to do anything to add them.
Okay, and building on that, so let's assume you have a successful connector in a store, and you would like to maintain it and extend it and so on and so forth. You were previously importing or pointing to the Open API definition. So let's assume you build the connector using CI/CD and the Open API file is being created on the fly and on the server. Is there a way of, or is this being automatically updated when it's in the store? So let's assume you are now just providing get methods for the customer. Let's assume you'd bring the other HTTP verbs to it. Would that be adopted by the connector that is in your application that has been taken from the store, or is it something that the citizen developer needs to do manually?
So from a technical perspective, so you if as a developer of the connector, you will have to submit the update with the updated artifacts.
Yes.
What's important, and this is something that you might notice with some of the official connectors like Teams, SharePoint, and so on. At some point, you might find that the same connector has the same method, but with V1, V2, V3, V4, because you have to take in account potential breaking changes. So if you change the definition of an endpoint that is used by an app, you are going to break it. So you have to handle breaking changes or use this approach of creating a new version of the same endpoint in case you are planning to introduce breaking changes in the way the endpoint works.
I understand. Okay, so there's probably, I mean, this is something where API management probably also could shine because
you can use API versioning.
Yes, indeed. But for the citizen developer that knows nothing about this, could probably be a bit challenging to understand why it's not working or why they will need to up the connector. So there is probably some more work to do on your, if you have a connector and you're publishing it.
So of course, again, I think here we have to differentiate between fixes or changes that you make without breaking anything. In this case, you can if you are changing something in the way the API is implemented, but the inputs and the outputs are exactly the same, the connector just points to an API, so you can update the API without submitting anything. The scenario where you have to take care about this, and probably the citizen developer will have to make changes, is when the same endpoint you are thinking about changing it, changing also the inputs and or the outputs. In this case, there will be work for you as a developer to submit the new connector, and there will be work for the user, for the citizen developer, eventually to switch to the new endpoint where you have changed the parameters.
Okay, but let's say we are not changing input outputs, we are just extending functionality, and let's say not only have a get but also provide a post. This would be then just updated automatically once the OpenAPI file has been updated, then the citizen developer could just leverage the post in their application.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, you still need to submit a new update through the portal because you are changing the artifacts. But as a citizen developer, you will just find out that the connector has some new endpoints, some new features that were previously missing. The only scenario where you have seen, you can see in the official connectors, this kind of V2, V3, V3, V4 is when they have some breaking changes in the APIs. So to avoid breaking all the existing customers, they basically implemented the feature with another endpoint so that they don't break who is using the old one.
Okay.
And sometimes what happens is that if you go to the documentation, they tell you, for example, which ones are deprecated. And so you might be aware that at some point you will need to move forward because at some point it might stop. The old one might stop working.
As for the approval process, that's probably another thing. So you are just providing an API, right, with a definition. So technically, you don't need to provide any artifacts or something because the store just, like when you are looking for a custom connector that is being published by the store, they are just providing some kind of link to is the connector running on my hardware, or is the connector then kind of like installed on the customer's hardware?
No. So the connector is an API, so it's running on your own environment. You are hosting the connector, so you just provide.
As a pro developer, I'm still hosting the connector. Okay. So I need to take this. So let's assume I build a connector for getting the top star repositories on GitHub. This crawling of GitHub would technically run as a pro developer in my personal subscription, and all the people that are leveraging this connector would kind of like leech data through my app services.
Yeah, exactly. This is why, for example, you might have connectors, especially if you think about the third-party connectors. Before using the Dropbox connector, you have to log in with your Dropbox account, and the options that you have access to will probably depend also by the licensing you have with Dropbox. The connector is basically just a facilitator, but when you submit a connector, you are submitting just the option for citizen developer to use this service. Microsoft is not hosting your connector also because it's your data. It's your API. So Microsoft doesn't control anything about how the API works. So also another topic is scaling. You need to manage the scaling of the API properly. So
is there any stewardship? Because that would mean, let's say I have a pretty popular connector in the repository which starts to inject some bogus data. I mean, let's assume let's stick with the GitHub repository, and I start injecting my own repositories just in order to get more traction, although they are not that important as, I don't know, .NET repository or whatever. Is there something like stewardship that they say that they continuously check those connectors that are available, or is this entirely on, if I would use as a citizen developer these connectors, this is entirely on my own risk, and if I trust this data?
So it's a mix of both. So all the connectors are certified and validated by Microsoft. So you can use them with a certain degree of safety. But Microsoft doesn't monitor the connector all the time to make sure that everything is working properly. So if the connector breaks or something stops working, you will need eventually to reach out the owner of the connector. But the connectors are tested and certified. So you can't submit a random connector that doesn't work or that steals data from another source or that uses data that you are not legally allowed to use. So
Who would
By the
do
way,
that?
I show you. You should see a banner now in the video.
Yeah.
That's the link of the starting point of the documentation on how to submit a custom connector. So if this is a topic that it's interesting for you, here you will find all the relevant information.
Okay. I probably still won't start developing connectors through the upcoming holidays, but it's definitely very interesting because it also allows you to build kind of meta APIs and already pre-aggregate data from multiple underlying APIs and then just provide these to your application. So that would be a use case I can see as a developer if you.
And by the way, in this demo we focused on Power Apps, but the connector, generally speaking, is available to the whole Power Platform. So the connector works also with Power Automate, with Power Virtual Agents, or also with Logic Apps, because Logic Apps and Power Automate are very similar and they share the same set of connectors. So it's not only building a UI app, but also building flows, for example, that performs logic in the background, or when a trigger happens, you can have your own custom connector there.
Did you know that you can replace Outlook rules by, was it Logic Apps on flows? Just saying.
See? Yeah. I just gave you some ideas.
Select Stern from star from and push this to, I don't know, dev null or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That is pretty interesting. If you're a citizen developer, obviously, if you're a software engineer, you build the API. I mean, you need to build the API anyway, and that usually means you're halfway there, and then you just need to find a poor soul that is building the front end. So
yeah, as I mentioned during the demo, the advantage of this is that it's not different from the way you build an API from a mobile app or a web app. So
exactly,
if you are, for example, an ISV that you are providing services through an API, it's very likely that you already have an API because you probably have a web app or a mobile app. So it's not very. You can leverage the same thing you have for supporting also the citizen developers.
Nice.
As an example, since it's a scenario that I was working on for a customer in the last couple of days, I was building an app which needed to interact with Azure tags using the Azure Resource Manager connector. If you look at the specs, the Azure Resource Manager connector is nothing more than using the Azure REST APIs behind the scenes. So it's not like they had to build the APIs for the connector, but the APIs were already there. They just needed to expose the connector on this for these APIs.
I have feared you said it's nothing. It's doing nothing more than scraping the portal.
Well, in my case, the scenario was applying tags to resources. So.
Yeah. I mean, they could actually just do this with ARM and PowerShell, but yeah. Okay. Anyway. Okay, pretty nice.
I think we can call it a day.
I think we can wrap up this topic. So everyone who's interested in supporting citizen developers and exposing their APIs for them, custom connectors for Power Platform, do it. Yeah. On the
this
first
was
try.
my Christmas gift. So you remember in the right name.
Indeed. Other than that, thanks for your time. Everyone have great holidays or vacation or not vacation, and just enjoy the not so busy upcoming days.
And I guess the most common way to say hello is see you next year. So.
See you next year. Unfortunately, that's not the end of a century or something, so we can't see you next century or millennia, unfortunately.
No,
but
just a regular end of it. Well, I mean, with everything that is happening in the last year, so you never know what a new year what might reserve. I mean, a couple of years we had a pandemic, a war, so
yeah.
Who knows what the future will hold?
I was about to ask, what are your predictions for the next year? I mean, I still have Alien Invasion on my bingo card.
And yeah, well, I mean, again, after everything that's happened and still happening, we can't rule out anything. So why not Aliens? I mean, it would be very fitting, actually. So.
Okay. Well, I, for one, praise the new alien overlords without knowing them. With that being said, have a great time. Stay healthy, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Bye.
Bye-bye.